to organize data, all right? So this is called a box plot, or also known as a box and whisker plot, okay? So right now you should be writing with your normal writing utensil, okay? But you have 5 highlighter colors at your disposal. So first and foremost, a box plot is going to show a 5-number summary. So first 2 blanks should be 5-number statistical summary. Now, if you recall, the word statistical versus non-statistical is like Cheesecake Factory compared to Chick-fil-A. So we have statistical things where we have a lot of numbers, non-statistical things where we don't have any differences in the numbers. Okay, so this is going to have different numbers a part of it. All right. This is also going to separate our data into quartiles. This is an interesting keyword. So Q-U-A-R-T-I-L-E-S, quartiles. Now hopefully the word quartiles makes you think of a similarly spelled word. What word might that be?
Quarters.
Quarters, yeah. So this graph here that you see is going to be broken down into fourths.
Cool.
All right. So this first line, otherwise known as the whisker, from the minimum to what we're going to learn about, is called the Q1. That's the first quartile. The first part of the box is called the second quartile, third quartile, and the last whisker part is the fourth quartile. All right. So again, this graph is again made up of those 5 numbers that we see. So the minimum, the Q1, the median, the Q3, and the maximum. We've seen 3 of these numbers before. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my 5 highlighters. In just a moment, we're going to color code this visual together, and then we're going to color code the table down below, which goes into detail about what those 5 things are. Okay? Starting with the first one that we see. What color do we want to start off with first?
Pink.
Pink. My minimum, I'm going to do pink with. So I'm going to highlight where it says min, right there. I'm also going to highlight the word minimum down below. You can then cap this color and go back to your normal writing utensil. All right. Minimum, otherwise known as the what number in a data set?
Lowest.
The lowest, the smallest, whatever you want. So let's say I like smallest, but if you want to write lowest, that doesn't bother me. It's the smallest number in a data set. Alright, I'm going to jump around because I would rather do the ones that we know first and then do the unknown ones. What color do you guys want to do next? Orange. Pick up orange. I'm going to highlight maximum at the very other end, very far end, right there, in orange. And then in our chart, at the second to last one where it says maximum, you're going to highlight that in orange. So oppositely to minimum, instead of the smallest number in a data set, it's the highest or biggest. Alright, now I'm going to pick my third highlighter color. I'm going to go personally with purple.
Better go where your punches come to.
Alright. The next word that we've already seen is median. So highlight median in this color, please. Above. This one also is the middle of the box portion, so I'm also going to highlight that middle line. Alright, this middle line. And then I'm also going to highlight in the middle of my chart down below the word median. What's a synonym for median? Middle. So after you've highlighted those 3 things, you're going to go to your normal writing utensil, and we're going to fill in that it is the middle number in a data set. middle number.
Are we gonna be getting to page 8 today?
Huh?
Are we gonna be getting to page 8 today?
Probably not. I'm not gonna rush into it. I'll have you guys finish that homework. Cool. Yeah. All right. So we've covered again minimum, maximum, and medium. We've seen those three before. The two new ones that you guys are gonna see today are Q1 and Q3. I'm gonna go green next. So pick your green highlighter up, or whatever highlighter color you're working with. I'm gonna highlight Q1 on my visual, and also the start of the box right there with it. And then also Q1 in my chart. Once I've highlighted those three things, let's talk about what Q1 represents. So underneath it, it says first quartile, all right? So again, once I've made it from my minimum to Q1, that's the first quarter or first fourth of my box plot, okay? This is essentially where 25% of the data sits, right? So it says first quartile, the 25% mark. The Q1, if you look between the minimum and the median, visually, it will not always be smack dab in the middle. However, it is in fact the median, or the middle number in between the minimum and our actual median. So in the box next to it, it says median of the first half of the data. So it's the median or middle of the first half of the data. Then I'm going to go into my last color. I'm using blue. We're going to go over Q3. Q3 is the same thing, but instead of the middle of the first half, it's the middle of the second half of the data. So again, it's the median of the second half of the data. So we have 5 numbers that contribute to the making of a box plot, okay? Now, there are 2 things on this page that I would like to utilize, all right? So, there is one more vocab word at the bottom of this chart. It says an outlier. I'm not going to highlight it because, in particular, this picture on top right here does not show an outlier, okay, that we know of. But an outlier can be a separate dot or a data value that is really wildly different than the rest of the data. It's a bit easier to spot on a dot plot than it is on a box plot, okay? So it's either significantly smaller or it's significantly bigger than the bulk of the data, all right? The last thing I want to cover is how to find a median when there might be more than one. So far in all of the classwork and the homework I have given you guys, the median has always been a singular number. You cross them out on both sides, you narrow it down to one middle number. It is possible though, down here where it says, if there is an even number of terms, those 2 terms, you're going to add them together and you're going to divide by 2. Essentially, you're finding the mean or the average of those 2 middle numbers. When they're really close together, you can just see what's in between them, okay? So like if I end up with numbers, and you do not have to write this, if I end up with 2 middle numbers like 17 and 19, what is smack dab in between 17 and 19? 18. That's your median. You do not have to add them and divide by 2 because it's going to come out to be the same thing, and you already knew that, all right? So, let's stop there for today. And then you guys can take. Okay, so this is going to be page 8 notes. I personally am still going to use the 5 highlighters that I use. So if you are at home and you have these highlighters, you can color code with me. Otherwise, you can just do the work as we do it. I have my calculator with me, and we'll highlight on Monday or whenever I see you guys next, okay? So far we have just finished the page 7 notes. So we've been able to highlight and identify the 5 numbers that make up a box and whisker plot. So we're gonna put that into practice and we're gonna do page 8, which is a model problem together. So in our example, I have this set of data up top, all right? So we're gonna walk through the steps on the left side and we're gonna do the work on the right side. So for step 1, it says put your numbers in ascending order from smallest to largest. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've got 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, I've got 9, 12, 15, 18, 19, and then lastly, 27. All right, so I've got my data in order from least to greatest. And now we're gonna go on to step 2, which is where we're gonna calculate the minimum and the maximum. So because now I'm using some of my keywords from page 7, I'm gonna highlight them the same colors that I highlighted them over here. For example, my minimum is pink. So on page 8, I'm gonna take my pink highlighter and I'm gonna highlight anywhere that I see minimum. And I see it in the directions in step 2. I also see it right here in step 4. And I might come back to this color to actually make my plot later on. So I'm gonna put that to the side. I also see the maximum on page 7. I used orange, so I'm gonna highlight maximum in orange. And I also actually see these words right there, so I'm gonna highlight them there. I'm gonna go back to pink to highlight the minimum real quick, right there. I also see the median number, which I used purple for on page 7. So I'm gonna highlight that in purple. Right there. All right. So once I've highlighted those, you can stop and pause the video if you need more time. I'm gonna go back to my normal writing utensil at this point, and we're gonna finish up step 2. So again, it says find the minimum, the smallest number, the maximum, which is the largest number, and the median, so the middle number of our data set. I'm gonna write the min and max down in step 4. So because I've already written it in order, I know my minimum is 1. I also know that my maximum is 27. In order to find the median, if you think back to page 6's notes, which are right here, again, the median, which is down at the bottom, says to, after you order it from least to greatest, you're gonna cross it off, the data equally off on both sides to find that middle. We did talk about on page 7 how sometimes if you have an even number of data, you're gonna have 2 middle numbers in which you need to find the middle of, either by adding and dividing by 2, or just by simply identifying what the middle is. So let's go ahead and do that work right here. I'm actually gonna use a 6th color. I'm gonna use a yellow highlighter, and I'm gonna cross them off equally on both sides. All right, and you should see that 9 is the middle number that we got. All right, so 9 is our median. I'm gonna go ahead and write that in step 4. All right, so now that I've done and finished step 2, let's move on to step 3. Again, Q1 and Q3, they're both medians, okay? We've got the median of the lower half or the first half of the data, and then Q3 is a median for the second or upper half of the data. I am gonna show that work right here, and this will be important, and which is why I like to use highlighter right here so that way I can still see these numbers. One important thing here to note, and this is probably one of the more complex pieces of this step. Because this data set had an odd number and 9 is the middle median number, I am not going to include 9 when I calculate this. I am going to include 1 through 7 to find Q1. And I'm going to include 12 through 27 to find Q3. So I'm going to go ahead and write each of these groups of numbers down below. So we've got Q1 is going to be equal to the middle of this data set. And I'm going to go ahead and write this grouping down to find Q3. So if you need to pause to write this down, go ahead and do that. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same process that I used to find 9 in the middle to find the medians for Q1 and Q3. I'll just use my pen. So the Q1, the middle value is 5. And for Q3, my middle value is 18. So for Q1, I'm going to go ahead and write 5 here. And for Q3, I'm going to go ahead and write 18 down there. I'm going to put my pen down for a sec, and I'm going to color code and highlight Q1 and Q3. Again, on page 7, I used green and blue. So I'm going to use those two colors right here as well. Q1 for me was green. And Q3 was blue for me. All right, so now we've gone through step 3 and found our Q1 and Q3, and I now have all 5 of these numbers filled out. I'm gonna put a little asterisk star, which is just like a little note. So this is called your 5 number summary. The minimum, the Q1, the median, the Q3, and the maximum are all the 5 numbers that now we're going to use to create our box plot. On page 8, you can see that I've already given you the beginnings of a number line. So we're going to need to make sure that we make tick marks appropriately, which we've talked about when we started making dot plots. Because my 5 number summary, which has to be able to, I have to be able to fit all these on my number line, starts at 1 and ends with 27, I'm going to start my number line over here at 0. And I think I'm going to start out by organizing it by groups of 5. So I'm going to end at 30. Halfway between 0 and 30 is 15. And I can break down 0 to 15 and 15 to 30 into 3 groups of 5. So I'm going to call this 5, that 10, 20, and 25. So now you can clearly see I've got my big tick marks right now going by groups of 5, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. Because I do have some numbers that are in multiples of 5, I am still going to make individual tick marks in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 tick marks in between each group of 5. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You are a human making a number line, so just try your best there, okay? But again, your number lines always need to be accurate. Because this is called a box plot or a box and whisker plot, all right, you're gonna have part of it that includes boxes. It doesn't matter where you start, so typically what I do is I just start at the top of my 5 number summary and start there, all right? So our minimum is 1. So down here at 1, I'm gonna draw a line above my number line, a vertical one that looks like this. It's a little bit long. This is gonna be the end of my whisker. And so I'm gonna go ahead and label this the min. That's the minimum, and it sits at 1. The next thing I'm gonna mark is my Q1. This is gonna be the beginning of my box. This is at 5, so above 5, I'm gonna do the same thing. Again, you want it to look like this picture. So where I have the boxes in the middle and the whiskers on the side. So if you have a ruler, you're welcome to use it. It's not mandatory, but you guys know me, I like things to look nice. So I create a whisker in between these two vertical lines, and we're gonna keep going now. So now the next thing actually that I wanna mark before I move on is Q1 above this line. So please mark Q1. Then we're gonna go on to our median, which is at 9. So just before 10, I'm gonna draw another vertical line and I'm gonna label it MED, short for median. However, this is not a whisker. This is the beginning of your box. So you're gonna now connect it so it makes the beginning of your box. The next line I'm gonna apply is Q3, and that's at 18. So right over here, and I'm gonna label that Q3 as well. And then I'm gonna connect it with the rest of my box. Like that. The last number that you need to include is your maximum, and that's at 27. So here's 30, 29, 28, here is 27. That's our maximum. Again, I'm gonna use my ruler to connect it with a whisker, not a box. So now your box plot should look like this above your number line. Some graphs you'll see it will be on the number line, but because we're hand making these, it is much easier to read when it's given above. Now I'm gonna take these same highlighter colors I used in step 4, and I'm gonna go ahead and highlight and label my actual drawing. Normally, when you're doing this by hand for homework or on a test or quiz, you won't have to do that. This is just something I like to do as you guys are getting to know what a box and whisker plot is and where those labels go. So minimum is pink. Q1 was green. Median, purple. Q3, blue. And lastly, maximum is orange. All right. So that is the ending of our box plot notes right here. Thanks, guys.